Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode. I'm Coach Eric Orton, and always I have my co-host Zack Friedley here. We're talking coaching and we're talking all things training, and we've got a good one for you today. We're really going to kind of dive into hey, is it possible to over race? And how does overtraining or over racing affect short and long-term gains and approach to what you want out of your running? So we're going to dive into a lot of that and maybe how it really works back to how we establish our foundation or during base building time, which maybe a lot of you are feeding into right now, kind of coming off the year. So, but first, we always have our warm up. Zach, what's our warm up? You're going to TRE in what, a
Got
couple
TRE.
weeks? What's
Couple
TRE?
weeks.
Tell people what's going on.
TRE is the running event, and it's a huge running expo with pretty much every brand that you've ever heard of and probably never heard of. It's got like both ends of the spectrum, people that are trying to make it, and then big brands like On and Solomon and the ones that we know are there. They showcase their new products, what they got going on for the next year. There's speakers there, there's panels there. There's even a race. I think there's a 5K that I believe some of like the OAC team comes and does. So it's got something for everybody. And I'm going there as a speaker, and I'll be speaking about inclusion on a panel on the Wednesday there. And I'm going to basically talk about my UTMB experience. It's a heavy topic right now. A lot of stuff going on around UTMB, and I have a lot to share about what's going on behind the curtain with them and inclusion, since I was in that conversation with them for about a year.
And this is in Austin, Texas still, right?
Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
It's a great event. Last year was my first time, and I went kind of unknowing what to expect, and it was awesome. I mean, I chatted with so many people, so many different companies, so many different people that you've probably seen on Instagram are going to be there. And it's just a really cool place to network and kind of grow your community.
Yeah, I think I attended the first one maybe 10 years ago. I forget how long it's been. But for those out there who don't know, really the big purpose of this event for professional athletes is it's a way to network to gain sponsorships and partnerships and collaboration with brands. So talk to us about what you'll be doing from that end of things, for you personally.
Yeah, so I got my big sponsorship on, which definitely helps me race all over the world. But I still have other things that I need to pay for in my life, so I have to seek out other brand partnerships. And I basically go there to TRE, find some brands that really jive with me, and I approach them and share them my plans of what's going on next year, some of the things that I'm doing in the community, some of the like adaptive policies and races, stuff like that. And I just share with them what I'm up to and see if we can collaborate. And then hopefully walk out of there with some potential brand deals for the following year.
Essentially the professional runner hustle, right?
It's a hustle. But for me, I like to talk about these things. So it's not like too much hustling. It's just me kind of sharing what I'm passionate about. And I don't really stress about if I'm going to get a new partnership. The ones that will flow, and the ones that are in alignment with me and the things that I represent will find their way to me. So I have a lot of trust in the process.
Well, with that, why don't you just remind people what you got going on coming in February and maybe early next year?
Yeah, well, we're going to be in New Zealand. I'm actually hammering out the final details, putting up the race and run clinic link to people so they can register next week. And yeah, that'll be in Rotorua, New Zealand, right before UTMB Tarawera. And we're going to have an all-inclusive running clinic with the people of New Zealand. So you'll see people there, hopefully in wheelchairs, prosthetics, visually impaired. Could be pros that are racing Tarawera as well, part of this. And we're going to have a good time and then do a little race in the woods the next day. They have this redwood forest there that's pretty cool. 5K, 10K, wheelchair loop. It's gonna be cool. I'm excited for that, and I'll be racing myself there the following week. So I'm excited to see if I can get my speed down a little bit faster than I did last year. I want to go sub 3 hours in the 21K is my goal. and that kind of kicks my season off, and just really excited for that. Then we got the OG, a Born to Adapt happening in Los Olivos, and then between there, I might run the Mendo 50K.
Awesome. All right. Well, that kind of feeds us right from the warm up into our main set. And what are we going to talk about today? You have a great topic
Yeah,
on.
race selection. Like I'm at that time of year where it's November. I got to kind of start to put together my race schedule for next year and kind of, send that over to On and let them know what I'm going to do. And with that, I have all these different possibilities coming through my mind. And I'm also watching people race, and seeing their races that they choose. And like, how does a person pick out races that are going to complement their ability and where they are in their running journey? And like, how do you make it to where you don't race too much? And what is racing too much? And I have just so many things that I observe through Instagram and Strava, and I have friends and people that I know. I see them racing a lot. And, then you see people like Jim who maybe race like 2 or 3 times a year. And obviously the guy knows what he's selecting. And then you got people like Courtney who can race 300 milers in course record time. So it's like, how does one choose what is best for them? Are people's bodies different? So what works for this person may not work for this person. Yeah, and I have a lot of like firsthand experience seeing my teammates racing and being on the start lines of these big events. Like I saw Courtney race UTMB and cross the finish line, and just seeing the toll that it took on her was like whoa, like holy smokes. So all these questions come through my mind, and I'm just wondering what's your take on all this?
Well, I think that's a big can of worms, and I think we just start picking it apart with questions. And let me first ask you though, with your arrangement with your sponsor On, I think sometimes what gets pro runners into trouble by racing too much or training too much is that a lot of the races they choose to do are really suggested or dictated to them by their sponsor. How is your relationship, and how do you pick races with that relationship? Do you say, hey, this is what I want to do, or do they suggest certain things and you guys meet in the middle? How does that work for you?
Well, for me, I get a lot of my own paint. I have my own paintbrush, and I get to like paint my canvas and then say, hey, what do you think of this? And most of the times they love it. Like last year, we did a lot of UTMB heavy things because we were in negotiations with the adaptive policy, and it made sense for me to be at a lot of the World Series and then also race in the World Series final. This year's a little bit different. I'm going to maybe take a step back from UTMB because of some things that unfolded, and maybe race Golden Trail Series, maybe race in Nepal Sky Race, maybe race in the Sky Race Series. There's a lot of options for me, and I get to build what that looks like and then discuss it with On, and pretty much they support what I want to do. I'm going to mix it up this year and do a little bit of races that fill my soul up as an experience, like maybe going to Nepal where there won't be a lot of PR, and then maybe throw in a big Golden Trail Series and just kind of meet in the middle. Because it is important that I, for myself, pick races that feed me and my joy for running. Because that's why I do it, is I love running. I don't want to get caught up in the machine of going to an event because there's a lot of eyeballs on it or it's this and that. I also want to feed the experience part of me and go somewhere like Nepal that's been calling me for a while. So it's a mixture of both. I have it great. Other athletes out there might feel pressure from their brand to go do certain things. I don't feel that pressure from On, but I also am doing a lot of stuff.
Ultimately, this question, from my perspective, always comes back to what are your goals? And there's a lot of athletes out there who build their season around the goal of, hey, just doing as much as possible.
Yeah.
Or picking one or two big races to focus on. And ultimately, again, it comes down to what is your purpose? What is your strategy? What's your ultimate goal? And that race selection should really dictate that goal. For example, I've got a new athlete starting. He lives in Germany, and he sent me, a list of 5 or 6 races that are throughout the whole year. And I really had to work with him to prioritize those races. So there's a process involved so he doesn't overtrain or overrace. And we really went from the point of having no prioritizing plan around any race to creating an A, B, and C priority for each race. So now he's focused on one big A race and everything else builds around that. So now we have an ultimate purpose.
That's cool.
And other C races might become training races where now the expectation is that it's training. It's a way to get in a long run with aid stations with people. You don't have to carry as much.
Yeah.
Versus it wasn't a C race, and now he may go into that on his own, trying to do the best he can. And now he's overtraining throughout the whole year or over racing throughout the whole year and leading to diminishing returns for everything. Yeah. So with that, I'll open it back up to questions. I always lean a little bit more on racing less with better quality. I kind of grew up in the triathlon world with coaching and racing myself. And, back then when I first got into coaching, it was Dave Scott and Mark Allen in the Ironman. They really would do one Ironman a year.
Yeah.
And all their other races were shorter and faster. And I think if performance is your number one priority, looking to race a little less with higher priorities to 1 or 2 races is probably, in a general sense, a really good way to go.
Yeah. I mean, if we look at some of the top elite athletes like Jim, or like Tom Evans or like Courtney, they all have different kind of strategies. And it appears that what works for one might not work for the other. So do you think people's bodies are a little like somebody can handle more workload than the next person, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think comparison's a slippery slope. So I think we just got to get away from comparison in general. Yeah. But I don't know how to answer that. I'm still waiting for Courtney to crash. But with that,
no science.
She's totally blowing everything I'm saying up. But if we reflect on this year's goal, if I remember right, her first goal was to do Western States.
Yep.
Then it was to do Hard Rock, the Western Hard Rock Double.
Yep.
With the idea that the most important goal was just to do it. She just so happened to win, but her goal was just to do it. And then that fed into doing the triple with UTMB. Again, if you go back and watch a lot of her commentary and interviews, the idea, this comes out in a lot of what she says that I think feeds into what we need to talk about, is that a lot of her motivation, a lot of her goals is to see what's possible.
Yeah.
To see how her body's going to respond. It's not,
I would imagine she checks in with
her body. It's not to go there and win all 3 races.
Yeah.
That's a totally different goal. I'm going to go to UTMB after doing Western States and Hard Rock and see what it's like. See how my body responds. And that's a completely different goal and expectations than to go there and expect to do well.
Yeah. I mean, I think at that level, they're checking in with their body and just seeing where they are. And then if it happens to line up, it lines up, and then you see somebody like Jim who doesn't really race that much, but when he does race, dude's on, you
Yeah.
know? And then you look
I
at
think,
like Tom Evans doing UTMB, and then his body just said no.
see, great example. Again, I'll leave it at this, but go back and research some of the interviews done by these athletes and notice their language, the language they use. Completely different. One ends up in the hospital, another ends up winning. But I do like the maturity Jim has shown of not only being patient and doing what he needs to in training, but kind of his race selection now of really picking and choosing his spots. I think it's serving him really well. And this goes back to what you were saying of maybe just truly the whole point of this is understanding how your body works, how your mind works. Because one thing people don't realize is that a lot of times burnout comes more from a mental burnout than physical.
Yeah. I pretty much grazed it this year. Just I got right. I think I did a perfect job of getting right to that boundary and feeling it and being like, oh, there it is. And then kind of just like relaxing for a little bit. And that was going to UTMB, giving my all-time biggest effort of my life. And then several weeks later, going to Kayambe, putting myself in another intense situation with another intense experience on my body. And my body did well, but my brain was, and my emotions and like my spirit were just like depleted.
Yeah.
And I needed to just kind of go back home and reassess instead of keep the pressure on or the accelerator on and keep pushing and pushing. Because I could feel myself maybe being like, no, I'm done. Or maybe my trainings would have been half-assed or something.
See, and every athlete needs that rejuvenation. And I think that's a big part of the problem is that sometimes, and this is what a vicious cycle I see, is that an athlete will start doing well and the fear of losing fitness forces them to not get that rejuvenation at the end of the year that you're talking about. And they also, because they do well, they have this mindset of, okay, hey, I did well. Now I need to do more.
Yeah.
And that leads to serious trouble as well.
I mean, this year for me personally was my best racing year of my life. I went to 3 events and became the first person as an AK above knee finisher in all of them. Finished all my races, went on a huge mountain, and I'm like, wow, this is success. And then I get home and then the thoughts start creeping in of like, how do I one up this? Can I even still run? I haven't ran hard in 3 weeks. Like, is it gone?
Yeah.
All these like probably pretty ridiculous thoughts, but then you just got to kind of be the observer of it and not like identify with it and just kind of watch them pass by as like a cloud, and just kind of laugh at it. And then now here I am, what'll be November 3rd. And like my wife recognized this week that I was like pacing around the house and like doing stuff. And she's like, man, are you all right? I'm like, yeah, I'm just kind of restless. I'm like bored and I need to know what's next. And that's something for me that was interesting is like, what do you do after you hit all your goals? Like I've never really been in this position where I like slam dunked everything. Now you're standing at the top and you're like, what's next?
Yep.
Well,
you said it right, is that through this rejuvenation, 2 things has to occur. One, you get the physical recovery. And that doesn't take very long. That's 2 to 3 weeks. Your body kind of gets recovered for the most part. Again, a general statement based on what you're doing. But then secondly, again, it's that the brain needs time to recoup and regain that motivation. And I've found that if you get the right amount of rejuvenation and downtime, that when the motivation starts to come back, it's stronger.
Yeah.
Just like your body gets stronger through recovery, your body's going to get stronger right now from everything you've done this year. And so too does your brain. So that motivation from a brain standpoint comes back even stronger. But you've got to let that take place, that process take place. So when you are ready, you know it, and you're not forcing yourself out the door when your brain's still not ready.
Yeah, I felt the switch happen this week
Yep.
when I was like, dude, it's time.
Yep.
Like we gotta
start posting workouts, Eric.
Yeah, like ready to go. And I don't even know what my A races are next year.
Right.
You know, I've had thoughts even yesterday, which is a crazy thought for me. It's New York City Marathon week. All my friends that are in New York City, which my good buddy David Kilgore is like a big on guy in New York City, and he's got all these runs he's leading, and he posted his bid a couple days ago, and he's racing in it. And I'm like, man, this looks like such a good time. And then the thought's like, oh, should I run New York City Marathon next year? What does a marathon even look like for me? Am I crazy to want to run a road marathon when I don't even train for road marathons? I don't know. Like, what do you think?
I think that's a good segue into taking what we're talking about into base building and foundational training that's starting to take place now for you for next year, and maybe a lot of watchers out there in the audience, is that from a trail running perspective and an ultra running perspective, I think having a road race is a wonderful, wonderful idea, because let's talk about what we miss when we're doing lots of trail running and lots of ultra training and racing, is that trail running creates wonderful strength from hills. It's obvious that's great strength training in and of itself. But what we miss by running mountains is that creates slow leg turnover. Yeah. That makes us slower. So part of a great developmental early season base building can be a marathon or something short and fast where you're having to, this goes into how I would train someone anyways, but now you have a measurable from a road standpoint to help create that leg speed to get you faster. Getting faster is really where the magic happens as far as increasing your potential for the mountains.
Yeah.
And I just had a great podcast on my running show with Anna Gibson, who just raced the Golden Trail Series coming off of her collegiate career, and she just went pro. She's on Team Brooks. And we talked a lot about how important her track training is for her trail running and racing. How important do you feel your track background and having that leg speed helped you go into this summer at the Golden Trail Series?
The speed is honestly really important. Like, people don't always realize, I think, looking at trail running, that you do have to run like low 5-minute pace sometimes. You know, like I raced at Mammoth Trail Fest. It's a 26K race that takes you 2.5 hours. But the last 5 miles of that race, like I ran every mile under 6-minute pace. So you're like cooking down some mountain. And like, if you don't train on the road running sub 6-minute pace at any point, like you're going to get destroyed. Like your body just cannot handle like that level of just like that turnover that you need to do that. So yeah, I think it's super important.
So again, this needs to take place in base building. That's something that people don't understand, is that we hear base building or foundational building, we often think long, easy miles. And there's 3 components that occur during base building. We have endurance, which is your zone 2, long, easy stuff. Separate to that, we have strength development. And third, we have speed development. These 3 pillars should take place during foundational base building. And then as you get closer to your race, we start meshing these into strength endurance as one, speed endurance as one. Whereas in base building, speed and endurance are 2 things. Okay? So you're creating a better foundation from a speed, strength, and endurance standpoint to work with to allow you to get better.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's the key, is that you always want to improve your potential rather than just go back to easy running and only focusing on endurance during foundational time.
Interesting.
So getting back to the point is doing some road running can be very, very beneficial from a training and improving your potential as an ultra athlete or as a trail runner.
Yeah. The only thing with me, it's a little bit different is my prosthetic leg is designed. We make it with the intent that it's going to be in a mountain. So it's a little bit heavier, a little bit more stiff than what you would potentially use on like a fast marathon or like a sprinter. And even like the way the blade interacts with the ground and the angle and the tread, there's like a lot of stuff. I think that might be something I do is a road marathon. I haven't really gone there and said yes, but I think it's orbiting around my brain of like, what does that look like? What does a fast Zack look like?
Well,
what would my goal be? I don't know.
My point being is that whether you ultimately end up racing a marathon or not, the point being is doing that type of training is very, very beneficial for ultimately what your higher priority is.
Yeah.
And that's where, I often go back to how foundational programs build and develop their athletes. You look at, again, I'll use Anna Gibson as an example. She started training in 6th grade. She was a cross country and track runner. She was one of the best track runners to come out of high school. And they're doing, short, fast races.
Yeah.
And then as they get older and older and older, they have this speed foundation to work with and apply that to endurance later when they get older and go longer and longer in races. So it's the speed foundation, the speed first, that's really their development. Whereas a lot of age groupers do it just the opposite. They maybe didn't run as kids and as in high school or college, and they get on, this motivational kick to become an ultra runner, a marathon runner, whatever it is. And that's great. But the first thing they do is develop their long distance base and negate those other two pillars of speed and strength that really will catapult their fitness and their performance so much quicker than just building endurance.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what does my training look like for the November, December, January? What do you envision for me?
Well, I want to, this kind of piggybacks off what we're talking about, is that I want to develop your aerobic system at a higher level. You've come off a lot of mountain training all summer long. You were in Chamonix, France, training long and slow, right? Then you've done a couple alpine ascents, long and slow. Okay. So again, now you have the hindsight of you're a much mature endurance athlete from a mental standpoint and from a strength standpoint, but I want to improve your overall efficiency. And therefore we're going to do a lot of flatter running to build that engine at a higher level.
Interesting.
Okay. And then begin to mesh that with longer stuff on trail. So you're going to see a lot of flatter stuff where now there's not a lot of fluctuation in effort. The idea is, hey, we want you to go out for 2 hours in zone 2 and 3 and be as steady as possible.
Yeah.
Because that's what you miss in trails. The effort's just, it goes up and down, and it doesn't allow you to build that efficiency like a long, steady effort does on flatter terrain. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to do trails. We're not going to do hills. The hill training now will become part of our 3 pillars of strength. So early on, what is a strength workout on hills? It's 30 seconds to a minute type of effort. That's raw strength. Okay. Then that morphs into strength endurance later, which would be longer climbs. So we need to improve your force production early with that strength training, so your force is better, your strength is better, and then apply that to strength endurance. You can't just go right to strength endurance because you miss out on that development.
Right.
Okay. And then with that, our third one, speed, we'll get back to doing some short, fast 400s like you love doing. And it's part of your strength to get that turnover that enhances that flatter aerobic efficiency I mentioned earlier.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited for it.
And especially, you're targeting Tarawera in February. That's a relatively flat course, relatively speaking. So this also feeds into what those early races look like for you. But we also have to keep our eye on the prize of the more important stuff is later. So we need to get you efficient now. And then as we get closer and closer, that training becomes more and more specific.
Yeah. I do have one more question for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Specific to me. So, whenever I race so far, we really haven't had like a goal time necessarily. It's to finish. So in a marathon, for me, obviously I'm going to finish. Like that's not really like, oh, that's the goal. So the goal would be like what my time is. How would I choose a time? Like what would my time goal be in a marathon if I decided to do that? Or is that the wrong way of even looking at it? Like what would the goal be?
That's a great question. And offline, when we were talking about what we're going to talk about today, you mentioned you have a little bit of fear.
Tons of fear.
Talk about that first, about doing a marathon.
It's weird to me. It's like what? So the like competitor in me wants to do like a fast marathon. Maybe this is a big number, but between 3 hours and 4 hours, somewhere in between there, which is fast AF for an AK. I think the world record is like 3:02 for somebody that's an AK within 10 minutes of that. And then I think to myself, okay, I ran UTMB MCC. It's basically got 10,000 feet of vert. It's a marathon in a rainstorm, tons of wind. Took me 11 hours. What would be harder, an 11-hour endurance, crazy experience, or a 3-hour 30 marathon? I mean, I'm like trying to like see this. I'm like, well, I obviously can endure a lot and I can push myself and do something like that. Why am I scared of a 3-hour 30? Like I can just hang in there for 3 hours and 30 minutes. I mean, I got that, right? So I have this is like my inner dialogue. And I'm like, why am I afraid of that? Why don't I want to just say that's what my goal? Like, I don't even want to verbalize it out loud because then I'm like, then people are going to hold me accountable for that. And what if I run a 6-hour marathon, which there ain't nothing wrong with a 6-hour marathon either.
Where you're going with this is that this is why I see trail racing and road racing as two different sports, is because what's different, every trail race course is different.
Totally.
Every ultra 100-miler is different. Every 50K is different. But every marathon course is the same. Granted, we're talking a couple minutes, maybe, Boston hilly course versus a Berlin flat course. We're talking a couple minutes, whereas a difference in a 100-miler could be hours.
Totally. And
but
thousands
with
of
that,
feet of vert.
Every person who knows anything about running has a perception of what time means with a marathon.
Okay, yeah.
They know what 3 hours means. They know what 4 hours means. They know what 2:01 means.
Yeah.
And so now there's this built-in correlation or comparison that isn't there with ultra running and trail running because every course is different.
Totally.
You look at Western States, it's 14 hours. Hard Rock is 20 hours.
Same with UTMB.
Same distance, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's not this correlation from marathon or in comparison with race to race in the ultra scene like there is with the marathon. And that puts pressure on people. Because now
I feel it.
If you said, hey, I want to do a 3 hours and 30-minute marathon, other people really kind of know what that means.
Totally.
Okay. And so I think that's what you're going through. And I don't say that from a negative. I think that's good to have that kind of challenge. But to answer your original question of what's my goal time going to be? All that comes in through our testing and through our training.
Yeah.
And so we don't necessarily answer that right away. We answer that as we get into the process of, okay, hey, what's your mile time? Because that's really the predictor of what your current potential is. You know, for example, if someone wants to run a 3-hour marathon, you've got to have your mile time close to 5:30 pace, or that 3 hours isn't possible.
Yeah.
So we can start to look at some of the testing as a way to measure a prediction of where you're at. And the idea is to improve that potential as we then continue to improve your endurance for that race pace.
Well, if I ever do run a marathon, it'll, I think, 100% be New York City Marathon. It could be next year, 2024. I don't know. We'll see.
Right. But either way, I think, again, getting back to, it's worthy to train for that early season for any ultra or trail runner out there to get that leg speed and to train those 3 pillars. Again, I think a lot of times, we touched on this last episode about maybe the overemphasis on zone 2 training. You know, zone 2 training is very, very important. That lends and leads to people thinking that's all they should do. And that's one of the biggest mistakes I see athletes make in base building, is they know how important zone 2 is, so that's all they do, and they miss out on improving their potential and improving their strength and speed during that time.
Interesting.
So, and again, let me say, when I talk about speed, we're talking, again, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, a minute type of efforts. These are very short and very fast. That's neuromuscular to train the legs to learn to turn over faster and to get faster. That's true speed training. It's not 3, 4, 5 minutes. That's speed endurance. That comes later. So it's very important to understand what speed training is. So in base building, again, we're talking 20, 30, 40, 50 seconds that are fun and create lubrication in our body and help us feel good.
This is interesting. It sounds like a lot of the stuff I see, a lot of people are putting, this is the phrase, the carriage before the horse.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So again, you can keep building on strength endurance and speed endurance, but that ultimately, if that's all you're doing, that leads to a plateau. You've got to go back to the fundamentals of improving your force and your strength, so speed endurance and endurance in general gets better. Okay.
Cool.
So cool. All right. Well, that's
what an episode.
Yeah, we can keep building off of that, and we'll just keep kind of taking you through the season and using that as a great material to drive this content and drive questions. And hopefully, again, people leave questions down below. Let us know what's going through your mind when you hear base building. What are you doing? What aren't you doing? And we can start hitting those questions. So,
and also drop what races you're going to do in 2024. I'm curious what everybody's doing.
There you go. Great. Yeah. And prioritize them. What's your big race of the year? Cool. And do you prescribe more on the quality over quantity or quantity over quality? What's your racing strategy? So cool. Awesome. All right. Over and out from Jackson Hole, and
I'll be in California.
Awesome. All right.
See you guys next time.
See you guys.